For a long time, there's been an effort in entertainment to broaden their audiences, and companies felt that the best way to do this was to introduce more diversity, whether it's comic books, movies, or video games, among others, and this has led to varying degrees of success. Some have been very well received and were very successful, while others not so much. Recently, there's been a fallout in video games regarding a company called Sweet Baby Inc., a consulting firm based out of Montreal, Canada. According to their website, their mission statement is to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video game industry, and to make games more fun, engaging, meaningful, and inclusive. Which sounds nice enough, but that isn't exactly what's been happening in practice. In fact, they've managed to pretty much turn the entire gaming industry against them, except for gaming journalists, but that's nothing new. Things really came to a head because of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, a game that was in the well-beloved franchise Batman Arkham, a series that's been well established for years now. However, Suicide Squad was a pretty major departure to say the least. The story focuses on the Suicide Squad, who have to kill the Justice League after they were brainwashed by Brainiac, hence the title. The premise on its own is not necessarily the problem, but that execution though. There have been major controversies about how this game was handled, and a lot of it stems from Sweet Baby Inc. One of the biggest ones being how they handled Batman, who's been with this franchise from the beginning. Players have been following his story for a decade now, and fans adore him. This was also one of the final performances from longtime Batman voice actor Kevin Conroy, who has also been a major part of this franchise, but tragically passed away recently. But they give him a pretty disrespectful send-off, especially knowing that these are Kevin Conroy's final lines. And he's not the only one that gets disrespected. It kind of feels like the writers just don't really understand these characters, and are instead just trying to be edgy for the sake of it. Like when Captain Boomerang wants to urinate on Flash's corpse, which is pretty out of character for him. A lot of Flash's villains actually respect him, and they just wouldn't do this. But you know, they're bad guys and they're edgy. There's also Jon Stewart's questionable bio. For a company that claims to pride itself on representation, what is this? It includes lines like, kind of guy that makes you think, oh, one of the good ones. And, I guess he's a good role model for the kids, if you want your kids to grow up to be know-it-all narcs. I'm sorry, what? How did they get away with this stuff? Also, on a side note, he says that he doesn't like Thanagar, and as someone who grew up on Justice League the animated series, I don't appreciate that. But you know, the problematic stuff is worse than him being out of character. There's also an out-of-pocket scene where Harley Quinn gropes Deadshot's butt, which seems hypocritical given Sweet Baby Inc.'s mission statement, which says that they're all about respect and empathy, only to have her ogling a man's butt and then touching him when she specifically was told not to. In context, this was a trap where they all get frozen, and Harley's completely aware of this, but she does it anyway, just because she wants to touch him, which is a pretty bad message. No means no. Is it really that hard to keep your hands to yourself? I know, she's a bad guy, but still very ironic coming from Sweet Baby Inc. According to IMDb, the writer for this game was Kim Belair, who's the CEO of Sweet Baby Inc. She wasn't the lead writer, but she still had a major impact on the story, and the entire point of Sweet Baby Inc. is to be a consultant on these types of issues. So that happened. These companies act like they're a benefit and an asset to gaming companies, but ironically they can be very forceful to the point where they create a toxic work environment. For example, Kim Belair was speaking at the GDC, where she encourages others to terrify companies to force them to do what they want.
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher-ups, and if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
Personally, I think if the service you're providing is good in the first place, you wouldn't need to threaten people. People have been asking for more diverse stories, like in Marvel's case, another major franchise that's been making corporate attempts to diversify. People had been asking for a Black Widow movie for years. She was a major player in the original Avengers movie, but she and Hawkeye were the only members of the original team to not get a solo film in Phase 1, and they could have given us a cool spy thriller movie with her and Hawkeye in Budapest. an event that's been referenced throughout the franchise. Instead, she didn't get a solo film until 2021, which was after her story was already complete, and was also directly following the events of Civil War, which came out in 2016, so an odd placement. No one really asked for this movie specifically, and it wasn't very good in my opinion, which is a real shame because Black Widow deserved better. Instead, they gave the first female-led Marvel movie to Captain Marvel, which was successful at the box office, although there were a lot of factors involved in that. Factors that have since changed, and now the sequel to that movie ended up flopping. Hard. Like one of the worst flops in Marvel history. I've already made a video about the Marvels, so I won't get too far into it, but in my opinion, the movie wasn't very good to begin with. Now, the main reason they push so hard for diversity is because they want to increase the audience base. However, if we actually look at the data collected, that doesn't seem to be the case. According to sources like IndieWire and PostTrack, over 60% of the audience for the Marvels were males over the age of 25, despite the fact that the movie's target audience was young women. The same was true for Madam Web, another recent female-focused superhero film that also flopped, and was also pretty bad. It kind of feels like studios just expect women and other people groups to support these projects just because they have representation, regardless of the product's actual quality. But whether it's a video game, movie, or comic book, diversity alone is not enough to sell these products. They need to actually be good first. For example, one superhero movie that did manage to do well with female audience members was Wonder Woman. The original Wonder Woman, not 1984. That one was also bad. But the original Wonder Woman had a pretty even split between male and female audience members. I think studios need to remember that at the end of the day, men like superheroes, and they're going to watch these movies and read these comics regardless of if they look like the main character or not. If they want women to see these kinds of movies, they're going to need to do better than just putting female characters in them. And the same goes for the rest of these industries and products. So what can they do better and how do they fix it? Well, one kind of superhero that usually does well with women is magical girls, which in my opinion we don't see enough of. The thing about superheroes is oftentimes they have a masculine aesthetic. For example, compare something like Sailor Moon or Winx Club to something like the X-Men or the Avengers. They have very different styles, one that inherently appeals more to women and the other inherently appeals more to men. That doesn't mean there's no overlap, but in general, a piece of media that has a large female audience and does a good job of blending both superheroes and magical girls would probably be Miraculous Ladybug. On the one hand, most of these characters are wearing bodysuits, which we typically see with classic superheroes, but they also have very flashy extended transformation sequences, and the Kwami fill that role of cute animal sidekick, and Wonder Woman had an endearing fish-out-of-water story and also a classic love story, so they can and have made superhero franchises that appeal to women, but oftentimes the industry will just pander, which no one appreciates, including the people that they're trying to pander to. For example, that scene from Endgame, where all the female heroes line up and announce their presence, and it's supposed to be this big girl power moment. It ends up slowing down the pacing of the fight and feels really unnatural, which is disappointing because there was a similar scene to this in Infinity War that worked way better. During the battle in Wakanda, there ends up being a scene between all female characters, but they don't stop the movie specifically to point out that they're women. They just let things play out naturally. They even get some humor in there, and there's nothing distracting or forced about it. It just feels like something that would happen in the field. And I think if companies would just do more scenes like this one from Infinity War, then they probably wouldn't be getting so much backlash and people just not showing up for their products. And I think it's something that the industry would really benefit from learning, because the approach they've been going with just hasn't been working. It feels too forced onto the audience, and then blaming that audience isn't going to win them any favors. It feels like they've been taking already existing properties and franchises and trying to force them into a mold that they want them to be, instead of just letting them progress naturally, like comparing those two scenes from the Avengers movies. Don't just turn to the audience and say, "Look everyone, women!" That's not very empowering. Really, they should probably be following the leads of companies like Stanley. Now bear with me because Stanley does not make media, they make physical products, water bottles specifically. However, I still think there's a lot that the industry can learn from them. But like Marvel or DC or the Arkham series, Stanley was largely considered a man's brand. It was created for construction workers after all. Probably not the kind of product you would expect women to stand outside all night for in winter weather, like we saw at the beginning of the year with their limited edition drops. So how did a company that's existed for 100 years that has specifically targeted men all that time suddenly break into the women's market? Well, it's actually an interesting story, because this famous Stanley Cup that everyone's going crazy over now was originally considered a failure only a few short years ago. Back in 2016, Stanley created the Quencher, which is what became the famous cup everyone knows now. Their main product was the Stanley Thermos, which was cinched at the top of the bottle, but they thought that if they reversed the design and cinched at the bottom, it could fit into a car's cup holder, which wasn't a bad idea. However, when they brought it to market, it totally flopped. Their regular audience just didn't care for it. Stanley makes very rugged products. A lot of their advertising is about how you can drop them in the dirt, and they were trying to sell the Quencher along with the rest of their camping products. Yeah, it didn't catch on. So Stanley chose to discontinue it and try to get rid of whatever they'd already produced, so they could move on. However, the Quencher had been noticed by a group called the Buy Guide. Nowadays, the Buy Guide is a lifestyle blog that curates items they believe their audience would be interested in. Products for women, men, kids, babies, stuff like that. However, at the time the Buy Guide was only just getting started. They didn't have a big presence, only a small Instagram account, but they saw potential in the Quencher that Stanley just didn't. They saw it as more of an everyday item for working women and busy moms, instead of a camping item, which seems kind of obvious in retrospect, but, you know, Stanley is over 100 years old and they're kind of set in their ways.
Well, did you know that the early Stanley insulated bottles were used by pilots in World War II?
They didn't even have much of an internet presence at the time, so when the Buy Guide tried to reach out to them, it didn't go anywhere. So in desperation, they decided to send the Quencher to an influencer, Emily Maynard from The Bachelor, despite the fact that the Buy Guide was not at all associated with Stanley, and the product wasn't even on the market anymore. But Maynard made some Instagram posts talking about the Buy Guide and the Quencher, which ended up getting Stanley's attention, specifically one of their female employees. She got into contact with the Buy Guide and was willing to help them talk to upper management, who needed to be convinced. However, the Buy Guide didn't use threats or any kind of intimidation. They instead put their money where their mouth is. Literally. The company didn't seem to want to take a risk on a new market that they weren't familiar with and they hadn't tested before. So the Buy Guide made a purchase order of 5,000 units with their own money, and they had to get their own warehouse and fulfillment team. So Stanley didn't really take a risk here. They had already discontinued the product and these units were just sitting around their warehouse waiting to be moved. And if the Buy Guide couldn't move them, it wasn't really Stanley's problem. However, they managed to sell all of their units in less than a week. But despite that, Stanley was still skeptical. Again, it's a 100-year-old company, they're pretty set in their ways, and they're really only focused on camping and construction. So the Buy Guide ordered another 5,000 units, and they again sold out almost immediately, but Stanley still wasn't convinced. So when the Buy Guide suggested adding more colors, since the originals only came in black and stainless steel, they got pushback because other colors just aren't on brand for them, especially not pink or pastels, and still weren't willing to mass produce the cup because they were worried about the market becoming saturated. Oh, if only they knew. Hindsight is 2020. But the Buy Guide really believed in the product, and I think it's important to note that the Buy Guide never made accusations against Stanley or their customer base, or demanded that they stop serving campers and construction workers. They were really only focusing on this one product, and building an adjacent market to the one that they already had. It's pretty much the opposite approach of what Sweet Baby Inc. and these other companies are doing, where they demand that already existing products that were already doing well be changed to fit their own views, and then pointing fingers at the customers. The Buy Guide just really believed in this product, and that was really the only thing that they were asking to change. Add more colors, maybe change the handle up a little bit, add a cute little logo. Yeah, that logo was not there originally. In fact, it's pretty new to Stanley products in general. But thanks to the Buy Guide, Stanley went from being a $70 million company to a $700 million company. They increased their profits tenfold. The Stanley Cup took off in ways that Stanley never would have imagined. On the Buy Guide's website, they say, "We wish we could say they listened to us. The truth is more that the massive sales won them over." Honestly, I'm glad the Buy Guide was able to launch their careers with this, because Stanley really was being too much. Why aren't hikers buying this? I guess it's just a bad product. They brought in the former CEO from Crocs, who knew all about what the Buy Guide was talking about with influencer marketing, because he had done something similar with Crocs. And like how he added all those little accessories to the shoes, the same thing was done with the cup. and ended up selling accessories that Stanley, who was over 100 years old and very set in their ways, never would have imagined selling. And now the cup is basically a phenomenon. People collecting every color, people lining up all night for them, people trampling their way through Target. Yeah, the Buy Guide kinda created a monster.
Police in Roseville arrested a woman after she was caught with a trunk full of Stanley Cups. The cups were valued at nearly $2,500. In their Facebook post, the Roseville police said that they, quote, strongly advise against turning to crime to fulfill your hydration habits.
Also, Stanley got outed for using lead in their manufacturing process. Apparently, it's fine as long as the cup doesn't get damaged, which is extremely ironic coming from Stanley, who has been priding themselves on how indestructible their products are for the last 100 years, going on about how you can drop it off a building, drop it off your motorbike on a road trip. Somebody used it to beat a rattlesnake to death and it was fine.
A few swings later, the rattler was dead and I was sure I had just sacrificed my Stanley bottle. I still have that rattler's tail and my bottle.
Are you telling me I can't use this to kill a rattlesnake? I'm just saying. But the point is they took a total flop that the company was trying to pass as camping equipment and turned it into millions and millions and millions of dollars, despite all the pushback and personal risk. And Stanley still has their original camping cups. They haven't gotten rid of them and they shouldn't. So it's not like they replaced one market with another, they just expanded their market base. And if they can do this with cups, imagine what we can do with entertainment. That scene from Endgame is like the original Stanley thermos, you know, the one they keep dropping in the dirt. But it's pink. No one asked for this. No one wanted this. It's awkward and out of place. But that scene from Infinity War is like the Stanley Quencher. It fits in the cup holder, it keeps your drinks cold for over 12 hours, and it has a sturdy handle with that little logo. Instead, we keep getting flop after flop after flop. The diverse audience they keep pandering to knows they're being pandered to, and they're not showing up. That audience does exist, and audiences in general deserve quality. They literally got mad at Dakota Johnson for saying that Madam Web sucked, but she's not wrong. And maybe they should just reevaluate their own writing instead of just pointing fingers at everybody else. Make better pieces of media. Make adjacent products instead of trying to sell the Stanley Cup to hikers. Or in this case, try to get rid of the hikers, and then try to sell the thermos that they keep dropping in the dirt to different groups. I'm just saying. But those are my thoughts. What do you guys think? Do you think the media could learn a thing or two from the Stanley Cup? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to the members: Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Dakari the Professor, Equestron, Norman Sweet Cream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Lucas Geist, J Draws, Blue Spirits, Meowsers, Sky, Jinke Z, Philip, Stutania, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Datadyne Executive, Kitsune Fiora, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Owen Wildish, Roderick Hare, and Mac B909. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have a Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. If you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. And that part's free. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.